right, welcome into Appeal to Heaven. I am Jonah Schultz, your host. We are off and running here, episode number 2. Make sure you are hitting the like button, the subscribe button. Join me here twice every single week. We are going to dive right into it today. We are on Iran war watch right now. I think all of you right now are probably monitoring the situation the same way that I am. Obviously, this has been ongoing for 20 years, 30 years. How long have we been talking about this? And we are now seeing very significant movement, tank movement, aircraft movement towards the Middle East, towards Iran from our forces in Europe, from our forces here in the United States, all moving in that direction. And it does seem at this point like something is imminent. Forces are amassing in the region. Obviously, we don't know. Donald Trump can be a little bit of a wild card when it comes to foreign policy, right? Sometimes you really don't know what you're going to get. He is somebody that has embraced the speak softly and carry a big stick. Well, not always speaking softly, but the big stick for sure, and really not being able to guess what his next move might be. However, it does seem like things are coming to a head here, where we are feeling like we're at the edge of this cliff and something is about to fall. And for people like me, I'll speak for myself, I've been very sympathetic for probably most of my life to the pro-interventionist side when it came to Iran. The pitch to us since we've been getting the pitch has been Iran is a belligerent nation that wants to wipe the United States off the face of the earth. And it's very easy to believe, right? Iran is a Islamic nation. Islam is, as I discussed last week, completely and utterly incompatible with Western values. It is completely, I would say, violent towards any kind of outside religion or belief system. It is a religion that ultimately seeks to destroy all opposition. So when you come to somebody and you say, here's this nation that's controlled, that is directly underneath this religion, right, in every facet of its culture and its life, its government, everything about it, and it wants to wipe you off the face of the earth, it's very easy to believe, right? And it's very hard to know anything else. We can only know and hear what we're told, right? You don't have the ability, I don't have the ability to go over and talk to the Ayatollah ourselves. So we really have to rely on the information that we've been fed, and this is what we've been fed for a long time. And I think for most people that started to fall apart with the debacles in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and the ongoing never-ending intervention in the Middle East. But I've had that sympathy because it makes logical sense from the standpoint of here's this nation, Islamic nation, we don't want them to get nuclear warheads, right? That seems like a very basic and a very reasonable point of view to have. That we don't want a belligerent nation to get these nuclear warheads. But as this process has gone on, we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu go on press conference after press conference, media tour after media tour saying Iran is months or a year away from attaining a nuclear weapon, right? We've been seeing this since the early 2000s. Really, for 25 years, we've been hearing it. They're 6 months away. They're 8 months away. They're 4 months away. They might just be 2 months away. And time again, that timeline continues to get extended. It almost kind of feels like we're talking about AOC and Al Gore and the climate alarmists that, remember the Al Gore doomsday clock? It used to be on Rush Limbaugh's website. It would tick down to the day. I don't know how long that's been expired, but we're still here. And we just had one of the most freezing cold months here in January. So the globe hasn't warmed, at least up enough for me. I'd like a little bit more, but it's pretty balmy today, 50 degrees here in Northeast Ohio, so I'll take that. But this alarmist kind of attitude has become the boy who cried wolf, like so many aspects of our politics has. And so for people like me, we started to say, okay, I was with you at first, but this seems to be going a bit too far because at first it was the nuclear warheads, then it was long-range missiles, then it's just ballistic missiles. And it basically kind of seems like the only real solution to where Israel will be happy and no longer demanding that we are engaged as the United States will be when Iran is completely and utterly disarmed. Now, I have no sympathy towards Iran. I don't care about them. I don't want them to be our allies or need them to be our allies, but we should be in this time period, especially when we're in the Make America Great Again movement and the America First movement, where we should be really judicious when it comes to where we are allocating our time, energy, and resources, and especially if we're discussing putting our men and women, unfortunately women now, in harm's way and potentially loss of life. These are not just things you do on a whim. And the other aspect of this, as we are now seeing Trump give Iran more ultimatums, is I thought we were all under the understanding that we already destroyed their nuclear system, right? Didn't we just go over this just several months ago when we bombed Iran, right, at the behest of Israel? We bombed Iran, the bunker buster missiles, right? Trump went out. There's kind of like a celebration, like, hey, we destroyed their nuclear program. That was basically the message that was given to us. And here we are again, just, I don't know how many months later, 6 months, 4 months, whatever it's been. I can't keep up. We are now back right here saying we got to do something about Iran. We got to bomb them. And then you have the people like Lindsey Graham out here who want complete regime change, who want to not go in themselves, obviously, but send me in there to do whatever needs to be done to topple another regime. They've never seen a regime that they don't want toppled, especially at the behest of Israel. And so this has become tiresome for so many people. And it's obviously become a focal point of conversation on both the right wing and the left wing when it comes to our political discourse. The left wing for a long time has been pretty anti-Israel because they are very Islam sympathetic, right? They are very pro-Islam, pro-third world, and really any nation or individual who's doing anything that they feel is putting down anybody who's brown, who's non-white, they're going to be against that. I don't take any of that seriously. But it's cropped up here on the right in recent years, myself included, of this belief, first of all, of the anti-interventionist, right? That we are in a time of such cultural decay, such economic crisis, such confusion in society, and such just decline in general as a nation, decline from greatness, that we obviously do not have the bandwidth to take on what we once did. And so when we're looking at Israel or the Middle East or Iran, we wanted to pull on the reins a little bit and say, listen, this doesn't have really anything to do with any specific country. It's really just a blanket ideology of being anti-interventionist. That doesn't mean anti-war necessarily or anti-violence, because we do know in human nature those things do come into play. They must come into play if you're going to survive as a nation. But we've seen the track record of our government over the last 30, 40 plus years, a track record of failure, a track record of lies, and our trust is completely broken on top of the fact we just don't have the resources. And so we look now, and so then we find ourselves kind of in bed with those on the left who have been anti-Israel. And it has caused many of us on the right specifically to dig into why, with all of these problems around the globe, right? If we're talking about democracy, if we're talking about genocide, if we are talking about the slaughter of groups of people, if we're talking about rights being infringed, we can point to hundreds of countries around the globe. We can go anywhere in Africa, basically anywhere in the Middle East, most countries in Asia. You can go around the globe. You can go into Canada right now, or the UK, where they're arresting people for social media posts that the government doesn't agree with. We can make the argument for any of those countries if we're just saying that's what is the baseline for military intervention. It would actually be a lot more just and pragmatic for the United States to go into Canada and liberate those people than it would be to do what we're doing in Ukraine or Israel. But that's an entire other conversation that I probably won't have time for today. So we've had to ask ourselves, why is there this deep, deep obsession with the state of Israel? Because it's not something that seems logical or even natural to those of us on the right who are questioning this relationship and seeing the response from those who literally turn violent and convulse at the idea that we may not want to give endless support to the state of Israel or become militarily involved or We want to break our financial bonds with them. They can become so fired up, so angry, convulsing, foaming at the mouth almost. And it's for us, we've said, okay, just take it easy for a second. Just trying to have a conversation, just trying to go about this process in a very logical fashion. And we've begun to question, why is this? Why is this the case? Why are you not allowed to question the state of Israel? Why are you not allowed to question Jewish control and the massive Jewish control of our financial systems, of our certainly of our political system, right? The massive Jewish donor class that controls much of our political climate here in the United States and around the globe. It's not anti-Semitic to question these things, and you might come to a conclusion, right? If you question something, the goal is to come to a conclusion, right? So if I investigate something, and I'm investigating something with no preconceived notions, I'm not saying I'm out to prove my own hypothesis on something. I'm just saying I want to understand why this is. You might come to a completely innocuous conclusion that, okay, it's just the way it is because of X, Y, and Z, and no foul play, and things just are that way. Or you might come to the other conclusion of, is there something nefarious going on? And I think when we start to dig in and press some of these individuals who are staunchly pro-Israel, who are mostly on the right wing in the United States, what you start to see is not so much of a I support Israel or Israel is our greatest ally. You start to see a worship, a literal spiritual worship of the state of Israel and the Jewish people coming from Christians. That's what you're seeing. It is a literal worship, almost seemingly having a liturgical process in it, right? We've seen, how many clips have you seen on social media, on TV, of high profile individuals really just bowing down at the altar of Israel, at the altar of the Jewish people, right? We've seen Mike Huckabee, the ambassador to Israel, do it time and time again, right? Calling Israel our 51st state, saying Jews are the foundation of morality, right? Coming from a Christian. I'm a Christian. I wouldn't say Jews are the foundation of morality. I wouldn't say a people who adhere to another religion, another faith, who reject the foundation of my faith, who reject Jesus Christ, are the foundation of morality. I would say that Jesus Christ is the foundation of morality. That would be the coherent thing to believe if you are a Christian, right? If your entire faith and belief system about life is based around the teachings of Jesus Christ, would he not be the foundation of morality? But the reason this was brought to front of mind yet again, in addition to what's going on in Iran and seemingly that we're going to get in ourselves into another war at the behest of Israel, this clip came up recently of Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck always will have a little piece of my heart because I really grew up with Glenn Beck. I remember when I was in middle school, I used to come home and I would get home, eat, and then Glenn Beck was on Fox News. I used to watch with my dad every single day. And I loved Glenn Beck because he would go into detail and really break things down in a way that I could understand when I was in middle school. And in many ways, it was like he and Rush Limbaugh were really my gateway into politics, where I became very, very interested at a young age and very, very passionate at a young age. And so I think Glenn Beck has done a lot of good ultimately and opened a lot of eyes and spread a lot of really positive information. I think he's been on the wrong side of a fair amount of issues as well. But this isn't to bash him specifically, but this video of him surfaced where he's getting very emotional, like he's fighting back tears, and he is talking about what he has learned that God has called him to do. And this is what he says as he's holding back tears. He says, "I felt impressions from God. It was overwhelming. I know why I was born. It is to stand as other people in history have stood, especially for the Jewish people." This is what he's saying as he's holding back tears. This is what he is saying is the reason he was born. what Jesus is calling him to do. And he says again, it's a relief to finally know. Like he's been going his whole life as a Christian, not knowing what his purpose on this earth is. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he says, as a Christian, oh my gosh, I finally realized that God finally communicated to me that my purpose on earth as a Christian is to stand with the Jewish people. Does that not sound odd to you? For me, it makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable. For me, it makes me cringe because it is so obviously not his purpose as a Christian. Your purpose as a Christian, we all have individual purposes, right? I think when we look at ourselves as Christians, whether you're a Christian or not, if you're a Christian, this is a message to everybody. But if you're a Christian, this is obviously true to you. But if you are somebody who's investigating, this is the way it is. If you are a Christian, we have a universal purpose. Our universal purpose is to follow Jesus Christ and to make more disciples. That's our universal purpose. But we also have individual purposes as well. When we look at our individual purposes, they're different for you, they're different for me. They are something that is unique to you, right? You have different skills and abilities than I do. So therefore, you're going to have a different role. Ultimately, we all have different roles in the same purpose. So your role might be bigger than mine in the sense of you might have a more public-facing role, right? You might go on to be somebody who's an incredibly powerful public figure who has a very large platform to be able to do the universal role, to be able to expand Christ's kingdom. You might be a stay-at-home mom. And so your role is not necessarily going to be very big and very public in the sense of people are going to see it, but your role is going to be incredibly important in raising that next generation. And we all have the role in everybody that we meet. So it is something of, I think, an insult to the Christian faith for Glenn Beck to even be speaking in this way, to be so confused, to be so conflicted. And that's why you start to identify that this isn't just some matter of public policy or matter of foreign policy. This is a matter of deep spiritual confusion that many people, like, unfortunately, Glenn Beck, have fallen into. And there was this clip that resurfaced lately. This was back, I want to say it was in December or so, but within the last 3 or 4 months. And this was a clip that I think very instructive, very illustrative. This was a clip of Bernie Moreno, the senator from Ohio. He was speaking at a church in Miami, Florida, a synagogue with Benjamin Netanyahu in attendance. Now, you might first question or ask yourself, why is a senator from Ohio speaking to a synagogue in Florida? Why isn't he either in D.C. or in Ohio? Why is he not in Ohio tending to the needs of Ohioans? Or why is he not in D.C. doing his job, but rather in Florida, speaking to a foreign leader and a synagogue, right? That's question number one. But he goes up and he's speaking, and this is all on video. You can find it if you want. But what he says is this. This is a direct quote. What I understand and what Christians all over the world understand is without a strong state of Israel, Christianity would quite literally be wiped off the face of the earth. Wiped off the face of the earth? Without a strong state of Israel? Christianity would be wiped off the face of the earth without a strong state of Israel. There's layers to this. Let's start with the obvious. Christianity, Christendom, Western Christian nations are the only reason the state of Israel exists. The only reason. The only reason. It was the only reason it was founded, the only reason it has been allowed to exist, the only reason it has been defended, the only reason it hasn't been taken over by all its neighbors. has been specifically because of Christian Western nations. Okay? That's number one. Number two, you claim to be a Christian. Bernie Moreno claims to be a Christian. But he goes out and says that his faith is so weak in Jesus and Christianity. His faith is so fake, probably, is so weak, is so useless that his entire faith and the millions of people around the globe, the largest religion in the world, would be wiped off the face of the earth if not for the state of Israel. A secular state, mind you, that doesn't adhere to any kind of Christian doctrine, that has not, in any meaningful conflict, aided the United States, has never stood shoulder to shoulder, has never put boots on the ground when we were called upon throughout the Middle East to do what we needed to do, or at least what we were told we needed to do, when the men and women of the United States served. The men and women of Israel stayed home. They didn't help. They didn't put boots on the ground. But whenever Israel's in trouble, we're expected to do just that. And so I find it incredibly insulting, one, as a constituent of Bernie Moreno, that he would be out gallivanting in Florida doing this and saying such nonsense, but two, as a Christian, for him to belittle my faith and my people so much as to say that we are dependent on some small little country in the Middle East for our existence, when we are the ones who have shouldered the burden of keeping their own nation afloat. And their people afloat, by the way. In all of the history of the United States, when the Jews have been put upon by foreign nations, who welcomed them in as refugees? Us, Christians, Christian Americans. The idea that we owe some kind of debt to Israel and to the Jewish people as Christians is totally backwards. Totally backwards. And I'm done pretending like this is normal rhetoric. This is some kind of normal conversation. And I think it's pretty important to point out the fact as well, and this probably tells you all you need to know, that Bernie Moreno received $450,000 from the Republican Jewish Coalition. I think that probably answers all of your questions about why that is. And it really brings up another point of so many of these politicians. And I'm not just doing this to pick on Bernie Moreno specifically. This is true of most of them. Bernie Moreno is somebody who is extremely wealthy. Extremely wealthy. He is one of the most powerful men on earth as a U.S. senator, right? He has a great story. Came over as a infant, I believe. Came over from Colombia. Comes in the United States, fleeing for a better life. Builds his own business, car industry, makes tons of money, becomes a U.S. senator, endorsed by President Trump, right? This is a great American story when you think about it. And this is somebody who's so powerful, very influential, very wealthy, and still at the end of the day will get down and roll over like a dog for the people who really pull the strings. Such a lack of pride in oneself, such a lack of dignity in oneself. It's really quite humiliating when you think about it, that these wealthy, powerful people will roll over, will speak. They'll sit like this and have a little treat put on their nose like a dog will. That's how they behave. And so I'm insulted and embarrassed as a constituent, but also it's just humiliating for the individual. And honestly, I don't know what goes on behind closed doors. I don't know if there's threats of violence, if the family members are in danger, right? There are, I think, very horrific things that probably go on. But at the end of the day, this is really, really humiliating stuff. And you know what? I continue to go down this rabbit hole, this thought rabbit hole, right? I'm not going to dig into so many of the things that people like Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes or many others who are out there have dug into when it comes to Israel's actions, or kind of the Jewish kind of power structure within governments and throughout the world. That's been talked about in a lot of detail by others who probably can speak to that much better than I can. But what's interesting to me about all of this is that there seem to be two religions specifically that are always directly at odds with Christianity throughout history, because there's no doubt right now in 2026 that Judaism and specifically Israel are at odds with Christianity, right? They are actively kind of dismantling the Christian belief system and swapping it for a odd Israeli Jewish worship bastardization of Christianity. But if you look throughout history, there are two religions that are seemingly always directly at odds with Christianity, right? Obviously, one that's talked about is Islam, right? We saw it throughout the Crusades, right? When when Christendom fought back to liberate Spain and liberate most of Europe that had been taken over by Islamic control, right? The Crusades that are painted as evil Christians went in and slaughtered a bunch of innocent men, women, and children, when in reality it was a defensive war, completely justified. The only tragedy is really that we didn't, Christians did not maintain control of the Holy Land, and maybe we should do it again today. But you have Islam that is obviously very much death to America, death to Christians, is a faith that is belligerent to all other faiths, but especially Christianity and Judaism as well, obviously. And then you have Judaism that obviously from the point where the Jews did kill Jesus, right? You go all the way back to the beginning of Christianity for hundreds of years when Jews were persecuting Christians, and this has happened for a very long time, all the way up till today, where if you go to Israel and you see the videos of especially the Orthodox Jews spitting on, attacking, kicking Christians who are just tourists, right? There's videos, countless interactions where you see these Orthodox Jews really going after Christians. And it's very interesting to me that these are the two faiths that you really see aggressive against Christianity. And I started to wonder why that is, because there are many other religions, but you don't see Buddhists behave the same way. You don't see you don't really even see Hindus behave the same way, although Indians have their problems. You don't see any of the Taoists acting this way. And so there are a lot of different faiths, but it seems to be Islam and Judaism, and they all come from the same tree, right? It's kind of painted that way. They're all kind of sprouted from Abraham. And what I believe has kind of been my epiphany has been that these two religions being at odds with Christianity, aggressively at odds with Christianity, makes actually total sense. Because both of those religions, being that they share some roots, both Islam and Judaism are dependent. Their existence is totally dependent on Jesus Christ not being the Messiah, on Jesus Christ not being king, right? On Christianity being a false religion. So it makes sense that there would be a certain built-in aggression, both logically, subconsciously, and spiritually with these faiths, because their existence and their truth depend on extinguishing Christianity. And so what both Islam and Judaism have shared through the ages, especially as Islam in general and Talmudic Judaism, has been the labeling of Christians and non-Jews and non-Muslims as cattle, as subhuman, and as individuals that ultimately need to be eliminated or put down, right? That's very much shared between the two faiths. And I find it fascinating how there seems to be a a more aggressive war from the Islamic side, right? The Islamic side is very much not, they are not, I would say, cunning necessarily. They are not subversive in the same way. They are not Machiavellian in the same way that Judaism has become. But Islam itself is very aggressive, right? In your face, we're going to immigrate to all of these nations and essentially take over communities, block by block, house by house, town after town, country after country, and then we're going to implement our own way of life. And they make no bones about it, right? They say this kind of stuff in public. And Western leaders have been so idiotic and so helpful to them in doing that because they are overseeing the destruction of their own people. Judaism is a lot more spiritual manipulation, right? Getting these people who are thought to be Christian leaders like Glenn Beck, like Mike Huckabee, right? Getting to these people like who pretend to be Christians like Bernie Moreno, getting to them either financially, blackmail, or twisting their spiritual belief system into getting all of these Christians who should be supporting Christian nations and Christendom and the expansion of Christ's kingdom into taking their time, energy, and money towards supporting a non-Christian nation and a non-Christian people. Now, this isn't to say all Muslims are evil, all Jews are evil. I've known a lot of Jews in my life who have been good people, who have been good to me, who have shared a lot of the same beliefs as me. We would disagree on this subject, obviously, but I've never found myself, even with these people that I've considered friends, thinking to myself, this person is the moral leader that I need to follow. I've thought this person is a good person. This person is living a good life. This person is a person I'm glad to have as a friend, but I want this person to find Jesus because that's their road to salvation. That would be considered by many in the Christian community now as somehow anti-Semitic, as somehow that I am trying to undermine God's chosen people. God's chosen people are the people he gave Christ to and who accepted Christ. His chosen people, in many ways, he chose the Jews to be the first to deliver Christ to say, this is yours. This is your opportunity to follow me. Then the Gentiles, right? And then expanded all over every corner of the globe. And so the chosen people are not a people who reject God's chosen one in Jesus Christ. The chosen people are the people who follow Christ because God chose all of us and desires for all of us to follow him. But the only way for us to do that is for us to choose to follow Jesus. That's Christianity 101. 101. It's the most basic thing. I think if you're watching and you're not a Christian, that would make total sense to you. Right? If I were a Muslim and I said, "You know what? This other faith is really my moral foundation." That would be idiotic. If I wasn't adhering to Muhammad, if I wasn't adhering to Allah and I was saying, actually, I like what the Jews are doing. I think, they're really the chosen people. Why am I a Muslim then? Right? If I'm a Christian and I think another people is the chosen people, then I might go join that side. And what's funny is that many of these people like Glenn Beck, that's ultimately what they've done. Is they've said, I'm on team Jew. I'm not on team Christ. I'm on team Jew. And that's the unfortunate reality. And so what has happened with all of this is this spiritual kind of mess that so many Christians have found themselves in, our government and I think our public policy has found itself in, is it's shifted from just this spiritual confusion and it's translated into our public policy. We're obviously seeing with Iran, we see it with Israel, right, of doing whatever really they want us to do, right? There's really no, when Israel wants us to do something, there's really no hesitation at all coming from any of our leaders, not coming from Donald Trump, not, there's a handful of politicians you might hear, and usually they're people like Thomas Massey, who I disagree with on certain topics, but they're people like him who soon find themselves in a huge primary struggle against a primary opponent that's funded to the tune of millions of dollars by Jewish donors, right? That's just the way it goes. That's just the way it goes. But you see it with the anti-Semitism approach, right? You hear Pam Bondi, who, who has talked more about anti-Semitism, gone on Sean Hannity and talked more about anti-Semitism than any other facet of her job. You've seen it with the suits against Harvard, right? You see it with these deportations. And I was never against these deportations from the standpoint of, you had people who were being were literally deported for anti-Semitism. And my thought process was like, well, if that's a way to get them out, we get them out. That I'm not really gonna, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth in that regard, right? If we're deporting foreigners, then however we do it really isn't too much of my business. Do it however you need to do it. But the fact that that was the focus, people weren't being deported for being here illegally. We're not deporting people for we know that are working here illegally, who are taking American jobs, who are doing all these different things. But the minute that they say something bad about the Jews or they're pro-Palestinian, we gotta get them the heck out of here. Again, it's fine with me if you want to do that, but you better be doing all the other things as well, right? And we obviously have all seen that anti-whiteness is way more rampant than anti-Semitism. And the definitions of anti-Semitism are out of control, right? Everything that I've just said would be labeled as anti-Semitism, and the only thing that I'm pointing out is that Christianity should be following Christ and Christ alone. And there is nothing anti-Semitic about that. That's if Christianity is anti-Semitic, then you're going to have some real problems on your hands if you're trying to deport anti-Semites. But it's translated into every single facet of our public policy, our foreign policy, our domestic policy. And there's one story I wanted to share here that I think is very illustrative of the point that I'm about to make and that I'm making right now. And this is from America First Post. The Trump administration is protesting Belgium's restriction on Metzitza Bipe, the Jewish circumcision practice in which an older religious leader, a moil, sucks blood from an infant's penis. The U.S. ambassador to Belgium, Bill White, called the Belgian government, quote, ridiculous and anti-Semitic, unquote, for investigating moils who performed the act. He also accused Belgium of violating the, quote, religious freedoms of Jewish communities. The practice, which is rampant in Orthodox Jewish communities, has caused infant infections abroad, including the transmission of STDs, and is deemed unsafe by medical professionals. So, we have all of our problems at home, but we are publicly throwing jabs at other countries who are banning archaic, dangerous religious practices. So, for example, what this is, right? They take in a baby, they circumcise them. There's a ancient tradition among some Jewish communities where the moil, who is the circumciser, he goes in and he sucks the blood directly from the penis. And obviously, if that individual has some sort of STD or disease, right? Say they have herpes or something like that, they can easily transmit that to this infant, to this newborn. So obviously, it is a practice that should not be allowed. Obviously. But what I find interesting about this is how much have we railed, whether it's from the government or from our culturally, against female circumcision, right? That's rampant in Islam, right? There are really brutal practices in Islam all around the globe, especially towards women, that maim and injure people, right? For life, especially women. And we've had no problem saying that's wrong and that should be banned. And there should be government policy to stop that. And obviously there should. But here's a policy that is very possibly injuring and giving a disease for life to newborn babies. And we're saying this is an infringement on religious freedom because it's Judaism. That's the way it is. That's when you start to see, wait a second, there is a specific group, a specific faith that gets more privileges, more protections, more lip service than any other group. We would not apply this same defense to any other faith, to any other religious practice that could do this type of damage. That right there, in a nutshell, is the problem. And why so many people like me, who really didn't think much about it until really the last couple of years are all of a sudden saying, hey, wait a second, this is out of control. This needs to stop. And we need to have an honest conversation about that. And there's nothing wrong with, if it is anti Semitic for me to say, you know what, I don't think you should be allowed to put your mouth directly to a fresh wound on the penis of a newborn, that somehow makes me anti Semitic, then we've totally lost the plot here. That's the most sane belief you can have. So, with that, it not only has Judaism obviously become kind of the focal point, anti Semitism, and all these conversations that we're having nonstop become the focal point of our public policy, but also really the celebration of any kind of non-Christian holiday. And so recently, this is kind of a big spiritual time in many faiths right now, where we're coming into the Lenten season, and also we're into the season of Ramadan. Now, this is something that really it irritates me on a personal level, but I think is also something that we do need to address from a public standpoint. And that's what we've seen. And if you're on social media, you've seen this all over the place. I've seen it from the Cleveland Police Department, from the Columbus Blue Jackets. I've seen it the Minnesota Vikings, many sports teams, many cities. Obviously, the Muslim mayor of New York going around and posting for everybody to have a wonderful Ramadan, right? That I hope this time, gives you reflection and brings you closer to God or to Allah, however they word it. And to me, what is the first thing in my mind that I notice, and you may have noticed this as well, is what's very interesting is whether it's when it's Ramadan or Hanukkah or any of the Jewish Muslim holidays or Diwali, or other minor religious holidays. What you'll find when there's public posts about them, whether they're coming from businesses or governments, whether they're coming from sports teams or public figures, what you'll notice is they're very, very high on religious imagery, right? When it's Ramadan, you'll see a photo of a mosque, right? You'll see their little half crescent moon. You'll see some of their instruments that they use for their celebrations. When you see Hanukkah, right? They have the menorah, right? They'll put a dreidel sometimes or something like that. When you see Diwali, you'll see the same thing. They do the Festival of Lights. They light candles and all of these different things. What I found interesting and what has struck me is whenever it's a Christian holiday, which are the foundational holidays of the United States, Christmas, Easter, those two being the big ones. What is the imagery that is and the language that is associated with Christmas and Easter? Christmas, they post a picture of a Christmas tree or Santa Claus. Easter, they post a picture of eggs or the Easter bunny. Happy Easter. Have fun with your family. Merry Christmas. Enjoy your gifts. Hope Santa comes down the chimney tonight, right? And I'm not against Santa Claus or the Easter bunny or the fun things that come along with holidays. I like celebrating those things. But don't you find it odd how in the imagery that comes from our government, that comes from our sports teams, public figures, businesses, you never see a cross, right? When it comes to Easter time, you don't see a cross. You don't see a stone rolled away from a tomb. You don't see a dove. When it comes to Christmas time, you don't see a manger, right? You don't see a little baby lying in a manger, right? You don't see Mary and Joseph on a donkey. You don't see any of these things. You don't see the actual reason that holiday is celebrated. And so what they've done is they have hyper focused on the religious aspect of Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, non-Christian holidays, And they have hollowed out the Christian holidays into completely secular commercial holidays. They don't celebrate the Christian holidays as what their proper intention is. And it's become very obvious at this point that basically what they've tried to split society into is Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, all these other tiny religions, and then commercial Christianity slash atheism. They want to hollow out, and they really have succeeded in hollowing out Christianity. No Western society should ever be celebrating these type of pagan observances. I can imagine for a period of American history when we had a homogenous society, when our nation was largely white and Christian, that it would have been interesting to observe, not observe from the standpoint of practicing it, but to see, to learn about Diwali or to learn about Ramadan or to learn about Hanukkah and see, oh, okay, there's these different religions that celebrate these things. That's an interesting thing to learn, to educate yourselves on, just to know more. I can see that. And I could see how that would have been interesting in different periods of time. But now there's a de facto celebration of those things from a religious standpoint in the White House. In the White House, we had Trump have a Diwali celebration where they're lighting the candles for a religious holiday, right? And for Christmas, what, we have a tree lighting? And we're pretending that we have Christian leaders all the way up to Donald Trump? This needs to stop, right? And it comes to the point that I have observed and many others are observing, the fact you can either have a Christian society or you can have a society that is not free, a society that is not prosperous, a society that is not cohesive or safe or any of those things. Look through all of human history. What are the things that need to be in place or have been in place for safe, prosperous, cohesive, free societies? The two things that have been in place have been Western and Christian. That's it. That's the only track record that we have for any kind of success in terms of what we understand in modern society when it comes to freedom, prosperity, coherence in a society, cultural norms, cultural happiness. Those are the two first requirements. Now, you can have those first two things and still not have a good society, right? We've seen that. But those are the two things that you cannot divide. Those are the two things that you cannot live without. And what have we done in the United States? We've thrown them both out. We've thrown them both completely out. We've forsaken our heritage, our foundational faith, and we've hollowed it out for commercialism, and we've filled it in with third world immigrants celebrating pagan holidays. And we as a society are now expected to celebrate those things openly instead of rejecting them. Instead of rejecting them and saying, this is a Christian society, we celebrate Christian holidays and traditions, we celebrate our Christian heritage, and we're not going to persecute you for following your own holidays, but we're not going to support you in that. We're not going to support you in your quest to drag our society, our culture in your direction. Any sane society throughout all of human history would have taken that road, but we don't live in a sane society. We don't live in a sane society. We live in a society of confusion, of chaos, and the only way back to that is through Christ, and that's why every single force for evil in this world is trying to drag us in another direction. So we're going to keep monitoring the situation in Iran. We'll see what happens. We'll see what Trump ultimately decides to do. I don't have a great feeling about it, but we'll see. I'm not in the military. I'm not a general. But ultimately, the one thing that we've seen, the track record that we know, is whatever the outcome of this is, it's probably not going to be in our best interest. But we'll continue to pray and hope that our leaders make the best decisions. And we ultimately, as individuals, have to realign ourselves and society towards Jesus Christ and follow him. And if we do that, we'll have a chance to turn things around. All right, this is Appeal to Heaven. Thanks for joining me here today. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, and I'll see you next time.